Hey, how's it going, everyone? Today I'm going to be doing a little bit of an experiment, and this is a live stream of your horoscope for Aries and Aries rising for February of 2019. So I'm going to be attempting to stream this live to not just Facebook, but also to Twitter and to also my YouTube channel. And it's a little bit of an experiment. We did a live stream last night to see if it would work, and it seemed to work okay. But yeah, you'll have to let me know in the chat whether it's working out and whether you can see everything okay and whether it started at an appropriate space. So let me pull up the chart for right now and switch to solar fire. All right, here's the chart for right now for when I'm getting started with this. We're still at the very end of January, but I'm trying to get this out before the end of the month. And here are the alignments. Let's switch it over, since we're talking about Aries rising, to your rising sign. And as usual, my usual spiel is that these horoscopes are primarily for those with Aries rising. You can also look at it relative to your sun sign, especially if you were born during the day and your sun was in Aries, or if you were born at night, you can look at it from the perspective of your moon sign if your moon is in Aries. All right, so let's move the chart forward a little bit. All right, so it looks like we have some people in the chat. Thanks everybody for joining. Let me know if you guys have any questions as I'm going through this, especially if you have Aries rising. Obviously it's not going to be applicable to everybody, but hopefully we can do a little bit of a discussion to give an overview of the astrology of the month as we go through each sign that's relative to or relevant to everybody. All right, so here's Aries rising, February 1st. I also wanted to show just the general ingress chart for the month. So this is the planetary alignments calendar for February, where we can see that Venus goes into Capricorn, which for those of you with Aries rising is your 10th house of career and reputation, on the 3rd of February. Then there's a new moon in Aquarius on the 4th. Mercury goes into Pisces on the 10th. Mars goes into Taurus on the 14th. The Sun goes into Pisces as usual every year on the 18th. And then there's a full moon in Virgo on the 19th. Additionally, we've got the planetary movements calendar, which shows where the planets start at the beginning of the month and where they will end up by the end of the month, with some of them, like Venus and Mercury, moving relatively quickly, and other planets, especially the outer planets like Pluto or Saturn or Jupiter, moving relatively slowly over the course of the next few weeks. All right, so let's switch back to the solar fire chart. So this is solar fire, which is showing the planetary alignments and where the planets will be placed starting on February 1st in the morning. So the first thing that we notice right away for those of you with Aries rising is that Mars is still transiting through your sign. So Mars is still transiting through Aries during the first part of February. On the very first day of the month, Mars is at 21 degrees of Aries, and it looks like it doesn't leave Aries until about February 13th, February 14th. So that's going to be sort of two halves of the month, basically. In the first half of the month, Mars is still transiting through your first house, which is the house of the body as well as the mind. And then during the second half of the month, Mars is going to be transiting through your second house, which is typically related more to finances, possessions, material goods in your environment, and things like that. So with Mars transiting through the first house, Cam White and I talked about this a lot last month in terms of what Mars transiting through your first house means. For some people, it can be a period where you have more energy than usual, where you feel sort of a heightened sense of vitality sometimes, especially those of you with night charts will tend to experience Mars going through your first house a little bit more positively and a little bit more constructively. It's just like having the energy to do more things than you usually do. For those of you with day charts, it might be a little bit more problematic or a little bit more of an having too much or an excess of energy, which can sometimes boil over to irritation or anger or impulsiveness. So one of the things that you want to be careful about, of course, this month, or that anybody should be careful about with a Mars transit, is just doing things a little bit too impulsively or being too quick to anger. This is especially the case towards the end of that transit, when it looks like we'll get a Mars-Uranus conjunction taking place just before Mars leaves the sign. So we can see Uranus, as I've talked about a lot, it's finishing up its transit, which it's been going through for the greater part of the last decade through your first house. And Uranus is getting ready to move into Taurus, where it'll be going through for most of the next decade as well. But just before the end of that, we see Mars conjoining Uranus exactly around February 13th. So Mars-Uranus conjunctions can be kind of a sort of explosive energy. So sometimes that can be very positive because it can indicate like an innovative outlet that suddenly sort of appears in your life and shakes things up in a positive or unexpected way. So for a lot of you, that's not going to be something new because this is a transit that that's been going through your chart for years now. So this is more like the end result or the final result of something that you've been working on or that you've been experiencing for the greater part of the last decade, in terms of Uranus going through your first house and changes in your personality, sometimes changes in your body or in your physical constitution in sort of unexpected and sometimes radical ways. And as Mars conjoins this for the last time, there's like one last push for whatever that growth or that change is that we'll sort of experience before Mars and Uranus both leave that sign and move into Taurus. So for some of you, that'll be more constructive. For others, it'll be more like an unexpected challenge that comes up. But hopefully for most of you, it'll be more of like a surmountable thing, where even if it's problematic, it's something that you're able to deal with and get over without it being too much of a major deal. So that culminates around February 13th, 12th and 13th, just before Mars leaves that sign and moves into Taurus. So that brings us to the second half. I sometimes wonder whether to structure the horoscopes completely chronologically or whether I should focus on specific transits and then like carry those through the month. So I think for the purpose of this, we'll just carry that transit through the month, since we're already talking about Mars, because that's, for one, that's your ruling planet. So it's sort of more relevant to talk about it and put more focus on it for those of you with Aries rising. So when we have that ingress of Mars into Taurus, like I said earlier, that's going into your second house of finances. So on the one hand, for some of you, if there's been any sort of physical or mental agitation that you've experienced with the transit of Mars through your first house, this should lead to or coincide with a sort of alleviation of that as Mars moves out and goes into Taurus on the 14th or by the 14th. But then what happens is it starts transiting through your second house of money and finances for the next several weeks. And this is definitely the second half of February is dominated more by this transit. And it's kind of the same situation with the previous house in terms of this may bring greater energy and greater focus to financial matters in your life over the course of the next few weeks because your ruling planet is moving through that sign. Sometimes it can bring challenges or difficulties in that area of your chart or in that area of your life, especially for those of you with day charts. So a common theme I've seen with Mars going through the second house can sometimes be greater expenditures than you were expecting or than you wanted to make during a period of time. Sometimes you have to be careful about it because it can indicate impulsive spending is a very common Mars second house type trait. And other times it can actually mean, in the worst case scenario, sort of like problems with money or running into a major challenge or even getting into a confrontation with another person where there's issues of like anger or conflict surrounding financial matters and specifically the things that belong to you. So there's a bunch of different sort of there's a bunch of different particular manifestations of that transit that you could end up having. But the important point is just understanding that it's going to bring greater focus to financial matters. And again, as with the previous month's transit of Mars through the first, one of the best things you can do is try to hold yourself back a little bit. Try not to do anything too impulsively if it's not necessary, because you might find that when you're in a clearer state of mind that, you know, making that impulsive purchase or spending thing that you thought was so important at the time was maybe too rash or was unnecessary, and that you spent more than you needed to, or that you didn't quite get what you expected that you would. So try to exercise greater caution as you're going through that transit, unless you're doing something particularly necessary. It looks like we got some people in the chat. Thanks everybody for joining us on Facebook and YouTube and Twitter. Let me know if you have any questions in the chat. I can definitely see the ones. I'm not seeing any in Twitter so far, so I'm not sure if that's connected, but let me know if it is, if you're watching this. If anybody with Aries rising has any questions about specific transits of planets going through certain whole sign houses, or if you've had any experiences with these transits, let me know, because I'd be interested in hearing that. All right, so let's switch back to the transit chart. So that's more or less the Mars transit, is just that shift of it going from your first house into your second house as being one of the major things that's really going to divide February up for those of you with Aries rising and Mars going through your second whole sign house. There's not a lot else, it looks like, to mention in terms of that, because then it's just Mars is kind of cruising through Taurus for the rest of the month, and it's not really making hard aspects with anything else. It's not stationing retrograde or anything like that, so it's just a relatively straightforward transit of that planet through the first half of Taurus for the rest of February, and some of the financial stuff that that brings up for you during that time. And of course, it looks like I have like a book delivery right now in the middle of this, but that's all right. Let's switch back to the chart. All right, so other transits for this month. Let's back up to the beginning of February. One of the things that is a big difference that I noticed when Lisa and I were doing the look ahead at February in the live stream last night is we've got a big shift from January, where for much of January we had Venus transiting through Sagittarius and forming that really nice conjunction with Jupiter in Sagittarius in the sky that we all saw in the early morning hours for most of January. And one of the major shifts that takes place this month is Venus pretty early on, or pretty quickly in the month, by February 4th, February 3rd, February 4th, ingresses into Capricorn and into your 10th whole sign house, which is the house that has to do with career, public reputation, your overall life direction. It also has to do with, because it's the highest part of the chart, it sometimes has to do with like superiors, like your boss or people that are somehow in charge of you or in a superior position. So Venus going into Capricorn is actually one of the other major sort of characteristic transits of this month, because Venus is going to be moving through that sign, as we can see, for pretty much the entirety of February once it goes in at that point at the beginning of the month. So one of the things that's interesting about that is eventually Venus conjoins Saturn just after the middle of the month, around the 17th or 18th at 16 degrees of Capricorn. And then eventually it conjoins Pluto at 22 Capricorn around February 23rd. And the last major transit it makes is that it squares Uranus right at the very end of the month. On like the last day of February, it hits about 29 degrees of Capricorn and squares Uranus at 29 Aries around the last day of the month, or maybe the first day of March. So for those of you with Aries rising, this is primarily a career transit. It's primarily bringing Venus into your 10th house of career, where it's starting to hit a bunch of other heavy outer planet transits that you're already having and have been having for a while now. Of course, we've had Pluto going through your 10th house since like way back in 2008 or something like that. We have Saturn, which we've talked about a lot on previous months, going through your 10th house of career, and some of the sort of positive or constructive things about building up matters in your career or overcoming surmountable difficulties. And for other people, it's a little bit more challenging in terms of running into sometimes a wall and realizing that you can't go further in a certain area, and so you have to recalibrate and maybe move in a different direction in terms of career or your overall life direction. Venus is really going to be accentuating some of those longer term outer planet themes this month by moving into Capricorn and by conjoining some of those planets. So for those of you with day charts, that's probably not going to be a hugely monumental transit. But for those of you with night charts, I actually think this is going to be a quite positive transit that will bring an alleviation of some of the issues that you've been dealing with Saturn going through your 10th house and through Capricorn over the course of the past year since December of 2017. Because people with night charts tend to experience Saturn as being a little bit more challenging and a little bit more sort of hard to deal with, so that some of the difficulties that you run into are a little bit more insurmountable sometimes, where Saturn is literally or sort of figuratively telling you no, that you can't proceed or you can't go any further in this direction, and that you have to figure out a different route or a different path to take if that path is closed off to you in some instances. So Venus, though, for those of you with night charts, is the most positive planet in your chart, and so having transiting Venus come into that house is actually counterbalancing and is going to be alleviating some of the more challenging things that you've been experiencing with Saturn over the course of the past year. This really seems to culminate around that Venus-Saturn conjunction around February 17th and February 18th, when Venus comes up and sort of plays to its fullest extent a sort of counterbalancing influence through the conjunction with Saturn. So positive things involving Venus can sometimes be like having help from a friend, getting help from a partner. Sometimes Venus transits are traditionally associated with like a feminine figure who comes into your life and helps you out at some specific point in time in a positive or helpful way. But generally speaking, I would just think of some of the longer term challenges perhaps that you've been dealing with in terms of career matters or in terms of figuring out your career over the course of the past year, and try to focus on that Venus-Saturn conjunction as being a potential opportunity for reconciling some of those issues and figuring out a new path forward. That would probably be the most constructive thing you could do with that specific transit. But the good news is that this transit's happening pretty much the entirety of February, and it's one of the other primary transits that February is characterized for you, because Venus at the very beginning of the month goes into Capricorn, and then it leaves Capricorn by the end of the month. So it seems like 10th house matters and career matters and some sort of alleviation of career issues or issues pertaining to your overall life direction is one of the main themes this month, with Venus transiting through the 10th house, especially for those of you with night charts, which means if your sun is below the horizon in the bottom half of the chart. All right, so those are the two major inner planet transits that are going on this month in terms of Mars and Venus. Let me check out the chat and see if anybody has any questions so far. Yeah, if you don't know your rising sign, then definitely just default to your sun sign for the purpose of these horoscopes. That would be fine. All right, I think those are the main questions. Let me know if you guys have anything else as I'm going through this. So let's switch back to the transits for the month. Two things that I should probably mention and not forget to mention are the two lunations that are happening this month. So it looks like we've got a new moon that's taking place in Aquarius on February 4th. And Aquarius, for those of you with Aries rising, is your 11th house of friends and groups and alliances. So part of the theme for this month is a sort of new beginning or some sort of new development in the area of friends and working with people and working with groups or sometimes larger social movements. And this is something that might start off slowly especially with Mercury going through Aquarius for part of the month. It may start off slowly with just increased communication with friends and starting to perhaps join a new group or starting to build a new friendship unexpectedly is a common sort of manifestation of like a new beginning in the 11th house of friendship. And it's something, though, that can sometimes start off subtly so that you don't really see its full manifestation, or you don't really realize the significance of it until you're a ways out, until in retrospect, basically, especially 6 months later when eventually there'll be a full moon in your 11th house. And then the things that sort of were initiated or started this month in February in terms of friends will either be brought to completion or just brought to light in a way that it becomes clear the significance of what happened back in February in your life at that time. So that's one of the major themes. Another major theme in terms of lunations this month is it looks like we have a full moon in Virgo in your 6th house of health and work. And it looks like that takes place on the 19th of February. So a full moon, as I was just talking about, sort of brings to completion or to culmination some events that you initiated or that started in your life 6 months earlier. So this could be some health thing or something in terms of your work that you started 6 months ago, but then built up until eventually it's clear that it's become a major part of your life at this time. So health-wise, sometimes that can be like positive or proactive. Like if you started going to the gym or something 6 months ago, you could start seeing real results at this point now that you're 6 months in, when you have a full moon in Virgo in your 6th house. If there's some sort of other health or dietary regimen that you started 6 months ago, then it's something that could like peak or come to a sort of culmination at this time in terms of really getting the hang of it or getting into the groove of whatever that is for you. The other side of the 6th house, of course, is work, which is interesting in terms of that complementing some of the career transits that we were talking about earlier with Venus going through your 10th house. So it could be that you started something or there was a new development in terms of your workplace 6 months earlier, but now it's sort of fully coming to a culmination in terms of seeing the changes in your workplace becoming more tangible and more noticeable in a way that's sort of different than it was before, and sort of notably different going forward. So those are the two major lunations that we have going on this month in terms of major changes. Let me pull those up on the actual transit chart to see what they look like and what other configurations are going on at the time. Okay, right, so there's the new moon in Aquarius. And let me adjust it so it's Aries rising. There's the new moon in Aquarius in your 11th house, and Mercury is transiting through Aquarius at the same time in the first part of February. So it's transiting through your 11th house of friends all the way through until February 9th or 10th, just leading to probably increased communication and discussions in that area of your life. And then the new moon comes in, accentuates that, and sort of sets a new beginning for that topic at the same time. Mercury does go into your 12th house here by February 10th, which can be a bit more retiring or reclusive type of transit, where sometimes the 12th house is not typically very social. It tends to be a lot more introverted. Sometimes the 12th house is associated with sort of like secrets and other types of sort of introspective matters. So Mercury going into your 12th can either bring greater focus and discussion in those areas, or it can just mean that you're not feeling as social after the 10th as you were a little bit earlier. And that's actually going to intensify later because we've got a Mercury retrograde that's coming up in March, which is actually going to station in your 12th house. But that's something I'll have to save for next month's horoscopes. Let's see. So other inner transit, that's kind of it in terms of inner planet transits that are just relevant for this month. We don't have any planetary stations for the most part. The Mercury retrograde isn't until next month. Mars and Venus are both direct. We've focused on the houses that they're going through because those are going to be the main things that dictate the sort of crucial short-term transits for you in February. And the rest is mainly long-term transits, like Jupiter going through Sagittarius in your 9th, Saturn through your 10th, which is happening for like 2 or 3 years, Uranus will eventually be leaving your first, but that's not really happening until next month. So we're going to have to put that discussion off until March. And then, of course, Neptune is still transiting through your 12th, and we're still sort of right in the middle of that transit. So I think that's about it in terms of major transits and in terms of your horoscope for February of 2019. Does anybody in the audience have any questions as I'm sort of getting towards the end of the horoscope for Aries and getting ready to wrap this up? This was kind of an experiment. I wanted to see if I could do a live stream horoscope for all of the horoscopes for February. This is the first one I'm doing. Last month, when Cam and I recorded them, when Cam White and I recorded them, we did them randomized, which was kind of nice, but I just realized I can't really do that because they need to be in order, and then if I live stream them, people need to be able to anticipate like which one is next and things like that. So I'm starting with Aries, and Aries gets to be first again as usual, and I'm going to see what I can do about making it through all of them tonight, although that might be kind of a tall order. Usually I try to shoot for like 10 or 15 minutes for each video, and even that's kind of a long slog, but it looks like this has been about 26 minutes so far, so it's going to be a long night at the current rate. But that's okay because it's a bit of an experiment, and we'll see how it goes. All right, so comments from people. All right, there's some good stuff. What if your rising is in Taurus? If your rising is in Taurus, then pay attention to the next horoscope, where I'll do Taurus after this. No, I'm not doing personal consultations at this time. I usually refer everybody to my partner Lisa Scheim or to my friend Patrick Watson. Also Kelly Surtees and Austin Kopic are great astrologers who do consultations very similar to my own. I primarily focus on doing my podcast and on teaching. And if you want to learn more about my approach to astrology, you can do so at my course site, which is theastrologyschool.com. Let's see, what else do we have comment-wise? Thanks, Spencer. Yeah, it's an experiment doing the live stream, and we'll see how it goes. Yeah, that's not something I can get to. Yeah, Sam, I'm doing a live stream for every rising sign, theoretically. I usually pre-record the videos and post them on my YouTube channel at youtube.com/theastrologyschool. But this time I'm trying to live stream them simultaneously to YouTube and to Facebook and to Twitter at the same time. So I'd recommend subscribing to my YouTube channel primarily, which is, as I said, youtube.com/theastrologyschool. And you can also find me on Twitter at Twitter / Chris Brennan 7, and Facebook. I have no idea. Just search for me on Facebook. But otherwise, you can also subscribe at theastrologypodcast.com. I don't think I'm going to post the audio version of these horoscopes this month, but instead I'm just going to do video versions on YouTube. And these recordings should also be available on Facebook and Twitter instantly as well. All right, guys. Well, it doesn't look like there's any more questions specifically about Aries rising. So I think I'm going to wrap up this live stream for my first horoscope for the month of February. You'll be able to see my progress and possibly me getting progressively more tired during the course of the night if I'm able to keep this up, although I might have to push some of them over into the following day or into, who knows, the next few days, depending on how this goes, but we'll see. I think this is a good start, and this can give you an idea of what the rest of the horoscopes are going to look like as I continue to do them over the course of the next night. So I think I'm going to go get a coffee, and then I will be back again shortly to do the horoscope for Taurus and Taurus rising. So thanks everybody for watching, and I will see you again next time.